The stale scent of burnt coffee and day-old grease clung to the air in the North Star Diner, a smell Elara Vance had long ago stopped noticing. It was the smell of survival. At 24, her life was a repeating loop of cracked vinyl booths, lukewarm coffee pots, and the tired faces of long-haul truckers. 4 years. 4 years since the scholarship letter to Columbia for art history had been folded away, a painful relic of a different life, tucked into a shoebox under her bed. 4 years since her grandmother's diagnosis had rewritten her future into a ledger of medical bills and double shifts. The bell above the door jangled, a harsh, tinny sound, at 1:17 a.m. Elara looked up from the counter she was polishing, her rag moving in hypnotized circles. The man who entered was an anomaly, a glitch in the diner's gritty matrix. He wore a dark, tailored coat that probably cost more than the diner's monthly rent, his shoulders broad and tense beneath the expensive wool. His hair was a disheveled black, and his face, etched with exhaustion, was the kind of handsome that belonged on a magazine cover, not in a fluorescent-lit spoon on the edge of nowhere, New Jersey. But it was his hands that caught her artist's eye. They were clean and well-manicured, yet they were clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. He moved with a predator's coiled energy, scanning the room not like a customer looking for a seat, but like a general assessing a battlefield. The only other occupants were Sal, the cook, hunched over a crossword puzzle in the back, and a couple of truckers quietly nursing their mugs in a corner booth. He slid onto a stool at the counter, the worn vinyl sighing under his weight. He didn't look at her. He stared at his own reflection in the gleaming chrome of the pie case. "Kitchen's closed," Elara said, her voice raspy from a long shift. "Coffee's still on, though, and we've got apple pie." He finally turned his head, and she was struck by the intensity in his eyes. They were a deep, stormy grey, and they held a chilling combination of fury and weariness. "Coffee. Black." The words were clipped, dismissive. She poured the coffee, her movements economical and practiced. She'd learned long ago not to take the moods of late-night customers personally. Everyone who walked in after midnight was running from something. She set the heavy ceramic mug in front of him. He didn't reach for it. He just stared into its black depths. "Rough night?" she asked, breaking her own rule. There was something about the profound tension in him that felt different from the usual late-night despair. A humorless sound, something between a scoff and a laugh, escaped his lips. "You could say that. I just spent the last 18 hours in a boardroom watching a man I trusted like a brother try to systematically dismantle the company my grandfather built." He finally picked up the mug, his fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. "Turns out loyalty has a price. His was 30 pieces of silver and a seat on my competitor's board." Elara thought of her grandmother, of the mounting bills, of the quiet sacrifices made daily. "Some people don't understand loyalty," she said softly. "They only understand what they can get." He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and his guarded expression softened for a fraction of a second. "What would a kid like you know about loyalty?" The condescension in kid stung, but she didn't let it show. "I know it's about showing up. Every day, even when it's hard, even when you're tired, even when there's nothing in it for you." She gestured vaguely around the empty diner. "This isn't a career. It's for my grandmother. That's loyalty." Before he could respond, the bell jangled again, more violently this time. 2 men filled the doorway, their bulk seeming to suck the air from the small space. They wore dark hoodies and ski masks, and the sight of the matte black pistol in the first man's hand turned Elara's blood to ice. "Nobody move!" the first man barked, his voice a low, gravelly growl. Phones on the counter. Wallets, too. Now!" The truckers in the corner froze, their hands slowly rising. Sal dropped his pen with a clatter. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, terrifying silence. Her training, the flimsy corporate video she'd watched once, screamed at her to comply. Give them the money. Don't be a hero. But then the second man, taller and thinner, moved past his partner. He didn't go for the cash register. He didn't go for the truckers. He walked directly to the man in the tailored coat and pressed the barrel of a second gun to his temple. "Julian Croft," the man hissed. "Fancy seeing you here. We were told you'd be burning the midnight oil at the office. Good thing we had a backup plan." The man at the counter, Julian Croft, didn't flinch. His stormy grey eyes narrowed, turning to chips of granite. "Thorne sends his regards, I assume," the gunman chuckled, a nasty, grating sound. "Marcus is just tying up loose ends. He wants the drive in your briefcase, and he wants to make sure you won't be a problem anymore." This wasn't a robbery. It was an execution, a corporate hit, playing out over sticky countertops and the smell of stale coffee. Ilara's mind raced, a chaotic flood of images. Her grandmother's face, the unpaid bills, the Columbia letter. She had built her small, difficult life on the principle of showing up. She couldn't just stand here and watch a man die. Her gaze darted around, cataloguing her environment not as a waitress, but as an artist. She saw shapes, colors, textures, possibilities. The heavy glass sugar dispenser, the industrial-grade coffee pot, still half full of scalding liquid, the polished steel edge of the counter. And then she saw it. A detail. Something small and wrong. The second gunman, the one holding the gun to Julian's head, had a tattoo peeking out from under his left sleeve. It was a distinctive design, a serpent coiled around a key. She had seen it before. She had sketched it. It was the logo of a private security firm, Aegis Solutions, a high-end company that provided protection for the ultra-wealthy. Why would a corporate hitman have the tattoo of an elite security firm? It didn't make sense unless he wasn't a hitman, unless this was a test or a setup. But the fear in the room, the metallic scent of it, was real. The gun was real. The first gunman was getting impatient. He gestured at Ilara with his weapon. "The register! Open it!" Ilara's hands trembled as she moved toward the register, her mind working furiously. She needed a distraction. Something loud, something unexpected. Her eyes fell on Sal, who was frozen behind the kitchen pass-through, his face pale. Behind him, on the stove, sat a large stockpot of yesterday's minestrone, kept on a low simmer for the morning shift. "Don't try anything stupid," the gunman warned, his eyes following her every move. She punched in the code, the drawer springing open with a pathetic chime. It held maybe $100 in small bills. As the gunman reached for the cash, Ilara made her move. It wasn't a heroic charge. It was a calculated act of chaos. "Sal, fire!" she screamed, her voice cracking with manufactured panic. "The grease trap is on fire!" For a split second, everyone's attention snapped toward the kitchen. The gunman holding Julian flinched, his head turning instinctively toward the imagined threat. It was the opening Julian Croft needed. He moved with a speed that was utterly at odds with his bespoke suit. He drove his elbow backward into the gunman's ribs, a sharp, brutal blow. The man grunted, his grip loosening for a microsecond. Julian spun, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting, forcing the gun upward. The first gunman, startled by the scream and the sudden movement, swung his weapon back toward the counter. But Ilara was already in motion. She grabbed the heavy industrial coffee pot and hurled its scalding contents directly at his face. He shrieked, a high, agonized sound, dropping his gun and clawing at his masked face. The diner erupted into a symphony of violence. Julian and the second gunman were locked in a desperate struggle for the pistol. The first gunman was writhing on the floor. Elara didn't hesitate. She vaulted over the counter, her worn sneakers slipping on the linoleum. She scooped up the dropped pistol. It was heavier than she'd imagined, cold and alien in her hand. She had never held a gun in her life. She pointed it at the struggling pair, her hand shaking so badly she could barely aim. "Stop!" she yelled, her voice thin and reedy. "Let him go!" The gunman, the one with the tattoo, glanced at her. He saw the gun in her hand, saw the wild, terrified determination in her eyes, and made a decision. He shoved Julian away from him and bolted for the door, his partner stumbling after him. They crashed out into the night, leaving behind a dropped gun, the smell of burnt coffee, and a silence that was more deafening than the chaos that had preceded it. Elara stood there, the gun still pointed at the empty doorway, her body trembling with adrenaline. The truckers were staring at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. Sal was peeking out from the kitchen, his face as white as his apron. And Julian Croft was looking at her, as if he had never seen another human being before. He slowly straightened his coat, his breathing ragged. He walked over and gently took the gun from her hand, his fingers brushing against hers. They were cold as ice. "Did you know who I was?" he asked, his voice low and intense. Elara shook her head, unable to find her voice. "Then why did you do that?" He gestured to the screaming man who had just fled, the dropped gun, the whole insane scene. "You could have been killed." She finally found her words, the same ones she had spoken just minutes before, though they felt a lifetime away. "You were a customer," she whispered, her throat raw. "It's my job to take care of the people who come through that door." He stared at her, his stormy eyes searching her face. The skepticism was still there, but it was mixed with something else now. Something that looked a lot like awe. He pulled out his wallet, but it wasn't to pay for the coffee. He extracted a sleek, black business card and a pen. He wrote something on the back and pushed it across the counter to her. "My head of security will be here in 5 minutes," he said, his voice regaining its command. "They'll handle the police. They'll need your statement. Don't talk to anyone else until they arrive." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "I don't know what to make of you, Elara Vance, but you have my attention." He turned and walked out the door into the pre-dawn gloom, leaving Elara standing in the wreckage of her ordinary life, the heavy silence of the diner pressing in on her. She looked down at the business card. It was made of thick, matte black stock. In minimalist silver lettering it read, "Julian Croft, CEO, Croft Industries." On the back, in sharp, angular handwriting, was a private cell phone number. She had no idea that this was only the beginning. She had no idea that in less than 12 hours, 4 black, armor-plated SUVs would descend upon the North Star Diner, not with sirens, but with the quiet, world-altering hum of immense power, and pull her out of her life and into his. Elara woke to the insistent buzzing of her phone on the chipped nightstand. She groaned, every muscle in her body aching with a deep, cellular exhaustion. The events of the previous night felt like a fever dream, a violent hallucination replaying in disjointed flashes. The glint of a gun, the smell of burnt coffee, the shocking weight of the pistol in her hand. She fumbled for the phone, squinting at an unknown number. "Hello? Is this Elara Vance?" The voice was male, professional, and carried an undercurrent of authority that made her sit up straight. "Yes." "Who is this?" "My name is Arthur Kendrick. I'm the head of Mr. Croft's personal security detail. Mr. Croft has requested your presence at his office this morning. A car will be at your address in 1 hour. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. My grandmother, Ilara stammered, her mind struggling to catch up. I have to check on her, and I have a shift at the diner. Your shift has been covered, the voice said, a hint of impatience creeping in. And we are aware of your grandmother's situation. The car will be there in 1 hour, Miss Vance. The line went dead. An hour later, Ilara stood on the cracked pavement outside her low-rise apartment building, watching as not one, but 4 identical black SUVs glided to a stop at the curb. They were menacingly silent, their tinted windows reflecting her own stunned expression. Her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, watering her wilting petunias, stared with her mouth agape. A man in a dark suit, with an earpiece snaking into his ear, emerged from the lead vehicle and opened the rear door for her. It was Arthur Kendrick. He was tall, imposing, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. The ride downtown was a silent, surreal journey into another dimension. The city she knew, the one of gritty streets and struggling storefronts, gave way to a gleaming metropolis of glass and steel. They pulled up to Croft Tower, a skyscraper that pierced the clouds, its name etched in discreet, powerful letters above the entrance. Kendrick led her through a private elevator that whisked them to the top floor without a single stop. The doors opened directly into an office that was larger than her entire apartment. 3 of its walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a godlike view of the city sprawling below. The 4th wall was lined with books, old leather-bound volumes that looked like they contained the secrets of the universe. And behind a massive desk made of some dark, polished wood, sat Julian Croft. He looked different than he had in the diner. Dressed in a perfectly fitted grey suit, his hair now impeccably styled, he radiated an aura of absolute control. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a sharp, analytical intensity. "Miss Vance," he said, not rising. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." She sat in one of the leather chairs opposite his desk, feeling small and out of place. Arthur Kendrick took up a position by the door, his arms crossed, a silent sentinel. "I trust your ride was comfortable," Julian began, his tone all business. "And let me start by offering my profound gratitude. What you did last night was exceptionally brave." "I just did what anyone would have done," she murmured, twisting the strap of her worn handbag. "No," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You didn't. Anyone else would have complied. They would have given them the money. You created a diversion. You disarmed one of them. You noticed things. Tell me about the tattoo." The question caught her off guard. "The tattoo?" "On the second man's wrist, the serpent and the key." "My security team is still trying to identify it. You mentioned it in your statement to my people. What did you see?" "It's the logo for Aegis Solutions," she said, the information coming back to her. "They're a high-end private security firm. I read an article about them once. They protect billionaires, politicians. It seemed strange for a common stick-up artist." A flicker of something, surprise, respect, crossed Julian's face. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "That is a very astute observation, Miss Vance. One that my own highly paid security team missed in the initial chaos. It confirms my suspicions. Last night wasn't a random robbery." "They knew your name," Ilara remembered. "They wanted a drive from your briefcase." "Precisely. It was an act of corporate espionage, orchestrated by my primary competitor, Marcus Thorne. He's been trying to get his hands on the proprietary code for our new AI platform for months. He's the man I told you about, the one who betrayed me." He leaned back, his expression turning colder. He clearly underestimated the kind of welcome he'd receive at a place like the North Star Diner. He paused, studying her, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical weight. "I have a policy of repaying my debts. I've had my CFO draw up a check." He slid a white envelope across the vast expanse of his desk. "This should be sufficient to cover your grandmother's medical care for the foreseeable future and allow you to pursue whatever life you had planned before. Well, before you had to put it on hold." Ilara stared at the envelope. It represented freedom, an end to the crushing weight of bills, the exhaustion of double shifts. It was everything she had been working for. She reached out, her fingers brushing the smooth paper, and then she pulled her hand back. "I can't take it," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Julian's eyebrows shot up. It was clearly not the response he was expecting. "I'm sorry?" "It wasn't a transaction, Mr. Croft. I didn't save you for a reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do." She met his gaze directly. "My grandmother taught me that you don't take money for decency. It devalues it." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the city below. Julian Croft looked at her, truly looked at her, and the mask of the powerful CEO slipped. She saw a flicker of the man from the diner, the weary, betrayed man who had lost his faith in humanity. "What is it you do, Ms. Vance, besides serve coffee and disarm corporate assassins?" The question was so unexpected, she answered honestly. "I was an art history major at Columbia. I had to drop out when my grandmother got sick." "Art history," he repeated, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time. It transformed him, chasing the shadows from his eyes. "Of course. The eye for detail, the observation that my security team missed." He stood up and walked to the wall of windows, his back to her. "I find myself in a difficult position, Ilara. Thorne will not stop. He will try again. He has a mole inside my company, someone feeding him information about my movements, my projects. We've been trying to find the leak for 6 months, with no success. My team is trained to see threats, to analyze data, but they keep missing something. They're looking for a soldier, a spy. But what if the leak isn't a soldier? What if it's a piece of art that's out of place, a detail that doesn't fit the bigger picture?" He turned to face her, his grey eyes alight with a new idea. "I don't want to offer you a reward. I want to offer you a job." Ilara stared at him, dumbfounded. "A job? Doing what? Serving coffee to your board members?" "No," he said, walking back to his desk. He leaned against it, his proximity making her acutely aware of the power he commanded. "I want you to work with Arthur and his team. As a consultant, I want you to look at our security protocols, our employee records, our internal communications, not as a security expert, but as an art historian. Look for the forgeries, the inconsistencies, the details that are wrong. Your perspective is unique. It's something Thorne won't anticipate." He held up a hand as she started to protest. "The salary will be more than enough to cover your grandmother's care and your own needs. We will also provide a full scholarship for you to complete your degree at Columbia whenever you're ready. You will earn it. This is not charity. It's a strategic investment." Her mind reeled. It was an insane proposal, utterly, completely insane. She was a waitress. What did she know about corporate espionage? But then she thought about the alternative, an endless cycle of shifts, the constant worry, the slow fading of her own dreams. This was a chance, a bizarre, terrifying, once-in-a-lifetime chance. "Why me?" she asked, the question barely a whisper. You could hire anyone. Because you're the only person I've met in the last 5 years who hasn't wanted something from me, he said, his voice dropping to a more personal, intimate register. You refused a check that would have solved all your problems because of your principles. That tells me more than any background check ever could. I'm not just hiring your eye for detail, Ilara. I'm hiring your character. In my world, that's the rarest commodity of all. He extended his hand across the desk. So, what do you say? Are you willing to trade in your apron for a chance to help me catch a traitor? She looked at his outstretched hand, then up at his face. She saw a man who was used to getting what he wanted, but she also saw a flicker of vulnerability, a genuine plea for help. She thought of her grandmother, who had always told her that the biggest risks often led to the biggest rewards. Taking a deep breath, Ilara Vance reached across the desk and shook his hand. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her. "Okay, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You've got yourself an art historian." The first few weeks at Croft Industries were a baptism by fire. Ilara was given a small, functional office next to Arthur Kendrick's, a space that was nonetheless nicer than any room she had ever lived in. She was buried under an avalanche of data, personnel files, security logs, internal emails, project timelines. It was overwhelming, a chaotic canvas of corporate life that made no sense to her. Arthur and his team were polite but distant. They saw her as the CEO's pet project, a civilian interloper in their world of shadows and threats. They gave her the files they were legally obligated to, but she could feel their skepticism like a physical barrier. Julian, however, was a constant, surprising presence. He didn't just hand her the project and disappear. He checked in daily, stopping by her office to ask questions, to challenge her thinking. "See anything yet?" he asked one evening, leaning against her doorframe. He had shed his suit jacket, and his tie was loosened, the sleeves of his crisp white shirt rolled up to his forearms. "I see a lot of people who work very long hours," she said, rubbing her tired eyes. "And I see a company that has a serious obsession with acronyms, but a traitor? No. Everyone looks normal." "Traitors rarely wear signs," he said, his gaze drifting to the corkboard where she had started pinning up photos of key personnel, connecting them with colored yarn like a detective in an old movie. "What's your process? How does an art historian hunt for a mole?" "I'm looking for provenance," she explained, warming to the subject. "In art, provenance is the history of a piece. Who owned it? Where it's been. A perfect forgery can often be exposed by a flawed provenance. So, I'm not just looking at the people now. I'm looking at their histories. Where did they work before this? Who did they know? Are there any gaps, any inconsistencies in their story?" Her methodology, so different from the security team's data-driven approach, began to yield small, interesting results. She noticed a junior accountant whose resume listed a summer internship at a company that had gone bankrupt 2 years before he claimed to have worked there. She flagged a mid-level manager in logistics whose travel expenses showed a pattern of weekend trips to the Cayman Islands, a known haven for shell corporations. Arthur Kendrick started to thaw. He began to see that her art history nonsense, as one of his men had called it, had a strange kind of logic. He started bringing her coffee in the mornings. Her relationship with Julian was also changing, evolving from a purely professional arrangement into something more complex. They fell into a routine of late-night work sessions, ordering takeout and debating theories over stacks of files in his vast office. She discovered a side of him the world never saw, a dry wit, a genuine passion for the technology his company was creating, and a deep-seated loneliness that mirrored her own. He, in turn, seemed fascinated by her. He would ask about her grandmother, about her studies, about the way she saw the world. He started bringing her books from his personal library, volumes on art forgery, cryptography and Renaissance paintings, the secret lives of artists. One night, as they were packing up, he said, "There's a new exhibit at the Met, Vermeer. I have to be in New York for meetings tomorrow. I thought, perhaps you'd like to join me, to see the real thing, after spending so much time looking for fakes." The invitation hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken meaning. It was the first time he had suggested they spend time together outside the office. "I'd like that very much," she said, her heart giving a small, traitorous leap. The day in New York was magical. After his meetings, they walked through Central Park, the autumn leaves crunching under their feet. They spent hours at the museum, standing in hushed reverence before the Vermeer paintings. Julian listened, completely captivated, as she spoke about the artist's use of light, the quiet domesticity of his scenes, the stories hidden in every brushstroke. "You come alive when you talk about this," he said, as they stood before Woman with a Pearl Necklace. "You should be doing this, curating, teaching, not hunting for moles in my company." "I am where I need to be right now," she replied, her gaze meeting his. "And I'm learning that finding the truth has its own kind of beauty." That evening, he took her to dinner at a quiet, elegant restaurant in Greenwich Village. The conversation flowed easily, moving from art and business to their own lives, their own fears. She told him about the crushing responsibility of caring for her grandmother, the guilt she felt for putting her own dreams on hold. He told her about his own past, about a father who had been a brilliant but emotionally distant man, and a mother who had left when he was a child. "My father taught me how to build an empire," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "But he never taught me how to trust anyone. He used to say, 'Everyone has an agenda, Julian. Your job is to figure out what it is before they use it against you.' It's a cynical way to live. And a lonely one," she added softly. "Yes," he admitted, his grey eyes locking onto hers. "A very lonely one. Until recently." The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. The line between boss and employee, between benefactor and beneficiary, had blurred into non-existence. They were just two people, finding a connection they hadn't realized they were searching for. After dinner, as his driver navigated the city streets, a comfortable silence settled between them. When the car pulled up outside her apartment building, he didn't just let her out. He walked her to the door. Under the dim glow of the porch light, he turned to her. "Elara," he began, his voice hesitant. "I know this is complicated. The job, our arrangement. There are 1,000 reasons why this is a bad idea." "Julian," she started, not sure what she was going to say. "But I haven't felt this way. I haven't felt this alive in a very long time," he continued, taking a small step closer. "And I have to believe that's worth the risk." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. His thumb stroked her skin, and a shiver traced its way down her spine. He lowered his head, and she closed her eyes, her heart pounding. His lips met hers, tentative at first, then with a growing confidence, a deep, soul-stirring passion that spoke of months of unspoken attraction. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers. "I think," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "that I'm in serious trouble." Elara smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Welcome to the club, Mr. Croft." Their relationship complicated everything, yet simplified it all. The late nights at the office were now charged with a new energy. Stolen kisses in the elevator, lingering touches over shared documents, secret smiles across a crowded boardroom. Ilara had never been happier, but a small part of her remained on guard. The threat of Marcus Thorne and the mole within the company was a shadow that loomed over their newfound joy. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Ilara was reviewing the guest list for the company's upcoming annual charity gala, an opulent affair held at the Museum of Modern Art. It was one of the biggest events on the city's social calendar. As she cross-referenced the attendees with her list of potential suspects, one name caught her eye: Isabella Beaumont. Isabella was a prominent socialite, an art collector, and, according to the file, Marcus Thorne's fiancée. She was on the gala's host committee. Ilara pulled up Isabella's file. On the surface, she was perfect. Old money, impeccable connections, a sterling reputation. But as Ilara dug into her provenance, she found a crack. Isabella's family wealth came from her grandfather, a shipping magnate with a notoriously shady past. Digging deeper into old society pages and archived news articles, Ilara found whispers of his involvement in the illicit art trade after World War II. It was nothing concrete, just rumors, but it was a dissonant note in an otherwise perfect composition. "It's too clean," she told Julian, pointing to Isabella's file. "Her entire life is a curated exhibit. There are no rough edges. And her connection to Thorne is too convenient. He gains access to a level of society and legitimacy through her that he could never achieve on his own." "Isabella?" Julian was skeptical. "She's a socialite, Ilara. More concerned with couture than with corporate code. Thorne is the threat." "Maybe," Ilara conceded. "Or maybe she's the one hiding in plain sight. The perfect piece of camouflage." The night of the gala arrived, a glittering spectacle of wealth and power. The museum was transformed, its white walls serving as a backdrop for designer gowns and priceless jewels. Ilara felt like an imposter in her borrowed emerald green dress, but Julian's hand at the small of her back was a warm, reassuring anchor. They were greeting guests when Marcus Thorne and Isabella Beaumont made their entrance. Thorne was handsome in a slick, predatory way, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. But it was Isabella who commanded the room. She was breathtaking in a silver gown, a cascade of diamonds around her neck. She glided toward them, her expression one of polite, icy condescension. "Julian," she purred, offering her cheek for a kiss he didn't take. "And this must be the new consultant. I've heard so much about you." Her eyes raked over Ilara, a silent, dismissive judgment. "Ilara Vance, this is Isabella Beaumont," Julian said, his voice tight. "A pleasure," Ilara said, meeting the other woman's gaze without flinching. "The pleasure is all mine," Isabella replied, her smile turning sharp. "It's always so refreshing to see new blood. Tell me, what is it exactly that you do for Julian?" The question was a dart, meant to sting, to remind Ilara of her place. Before she could answer, Julian stepped in. "Ilara's contributions have been invaluable. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have other guests to attend to." He steered Ilara away, but not before she saw the flash of triumph in Isabella's eyes. The encounter left a bitter taste in her mouth. Later in the evening, the main event began, a live auction of several donated pieces of art. Ilara and Julian stood at the back of the crowded room, watching as the bids climbed into the millions. The final piece was unveiled, a stunning, modernist sculpture of polished bronze. And then it happened. As the auctioneer described the piece, a slide of its provenance was projected onto the large screen behind him. It listed the chain of ownership, tracing the sculpture's history. The final name on the list, the most recent owner and donor, was Isabella Beaumont. Ilara stared at the screen, her blood running cold. It wasn't the sculpture that held her attention. It was the name of the gallery that had brokered its last private sale. Galerie Dubois. "Julian," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "Galerie Dubois. I've seen that name before." She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen, accessing the secure files she had spent months studying. She found it in the expense reports of the junior accountant she had flagged weeks ago, the one with the fake internship. He had submitted a receipt for client entertainment at a restaurant. The restaurant was next door to Galerie Dubois in Soho, and the date of the dinner was the same day that, according to company logs, a key piece of the AI source code had been accessed from his terminal after hours. It had been dismissed as a coincidence at the time. "It's not a coincidence," she breathed, showing the phone to Julian. "The accountant, he's the leak, and the gallery is the drop point. It has to be." Julian's face hardened. He immediately and discreetly signaled to Arthur, who was standing nearby. He spoke into his wrist. "Lock down the building, no one in or out. Get a team to the accountant's apartment, now." But as he was giving the orders, Isabella Beaumont took the stage to say a few words about the sculpture. She was radiant under the lights, the picture of grace and philanthropy. "This piece has always spoken to me of ambition, of reaching for the sublime," she said, her voice smooth as silk. She was wearing a magnificent diamond and sapphire brooch on her shoulder, a piece that glittered and flashed as she moved. Ilara's artist's eye was drawn to it. The design was intricate, unusual, a stylized serpent, its body encrusted with diamonds, coiled around a large, star-cut sapphire. A serpent, coiling, just like the tattoo. And in that instant, everything clicked into place. The final, horrifying piece of the puzzle. "Julian," she said, her voice shaking. "The brooch. The serpent on her brooch. It's not just a design, it's a key." He looked from the brooch to her face, confused. "A key?" "In Renaissance art, it's called a rebus, a puzzle in a picture. The serpent represents deceit. The star sapphire, in old gemology, represents truth, or a star to follow, a hidden truth. But look at the design. The serpent isn't just coiling, it's forming a pattern. It's a cipher." Her mind, trained to see patterns and symbols, was working at lightning speed. "It's a key, not a physical one, a cryptographic key. The pattern the serpent makes, it could be the final piece of the encryption algorithm for the stolen data." It was an insane leap of logic, a theory born of art history and intuition, but as Julian stared at the brooch, then back at Ilara's face, he saw the certainty in her eyes. He had hired her for her unique perspective, and this was it. Isabella finished her speech to thunderous applause. As she stepped down from the stage, Julian intercepted her. Ilara was right behind him. "Isabella," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "That's a remarkable brooch. An antique?" Isabella's smile faltered for a second. "A family heirloom," she said, her hand instinctively going to the piece. "Is it?" Julian pressed. "Because my associate, Miss Vance, has a rather interesting theory about it. She believes it's more than just jewelry. She believes it's the key to unlocking several $1 million worth of stolen intellectual property." The color drained from Isabella's face. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for Marcus Thorne. But he was trapped on the other side of the crowd by Arthur's men, who were subtly but effectively blocking his path. "That's the most absurd thing I've ever heard," she scoffed, but her voice trembled. "Is it?" Ilara stepped forward, her own voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Your junior accountant has already been apprehended, Isabella. He's the leak." Galerie du Bois was your drop point, but the data he was passing along was only partially decrypted. Your fiancé needed the final key, a key he wouldn't dare write down, a key you could wear in plain sight, a piece so audacious no one would ever suspect it. You're not just his fiancé, you're his partner, the mastermind hiding behind a socialite's smile. Isabella stared at Hilara, her mask of cool sophistication shattering completely, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You little nobody," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You think you can come into our world and tear it down? You have no idea who you're dealing with." "I know I'm dealing with a thief," Julian said, his voice like ice. "Arthur." Kendrick stepped forward, flanked by two other plain-clothed security men. Several uniformed police officers, who had been discreetly brought in, were now moving through the crowd. The gala attendees were beginning to murmur, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The party was over. Isabella looked from the approaching officers to Julian's implacable face, and she knew she was trapped. In a final act of spiteful defiance, she unclasped the brooch, but instead of handing it over, she drew her arm back and threw it with all her might, not at the floor, but toward the massive plate-glass window overlooking the city. "If I can't have it, no one can," she shrieked. Time seemed to slow down. The brooch, the key to everything, sailed through the air in a glittering arc, heading for the window and a 50-story drop to the street below. Without thinking, driven by pure instinct, Hilara launched herself forward. She dove, her body parallel to the floor, her fingers outstretched. The borrowed emerald dress ripped at the seam. She felt the cold, sharp edges of the brooch graze her fingertips, and then she had it, her hand closing around it in a desperate, painful grip. She landed hard on the polished marble floor, the impact knocking the wind out of her. But the brooch was safe, clutched in her fist. She lay there for a moment, gasping for air, as chaos erupted around her. She heard Isabella screaming as she was apprehended, the shocked gasps of the guests, and then Julian's voice, full of frantic concern, calling her name. He was kneeling beside her in an instant, his hands carefully checking her for injuries. "Hilara, are you hurt?" She opened her hand, revealing the glittering serpent on her palm. "I don't think so," she wheezed, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Provenance, Mr. Croft. The story is always in the details." He stared from the brooch to her face, his expression a mixture of terror, relief, and profound admiration. He scooped her up into his arms, ignoring the flashing cameras and the stunned onlookers. "You, Hilara Vance," he murmured against her hair, "are going to be the death of me." "Or the saving of you," she whispered back, her arms wrapping tightly around his neck. As he carried her through the wreckage of the gala, she knew, with absolute certainty, that her life as a waitress was well and truly over. The aftermath of the gala was a media firestorm. The story of the billionaire, the waitress-turned-consultant, and the dramatic unmasking of a high-society crime ring was irresistible. Marcus Thorne and Isabella Beaumont were arrested, their empire of deceit crumbling under the weight of the evidence Hilara had uncovered. The junior accountant, facing serious federal charges, cooperated fully, detailing an elaborate scheme that went back years. But for Hilara, the victory felt hollow. The public spotlight was harsh and unforgiving. Tabloids dug into her past, painting her as either a gold-digging opportunist or a lucky Cinderella. Her quiet life was gone, replaced by paparazzi camped outside her apartment and endless speculation about her relationship with Julian. The transition was jarring, and it began to take its toll. Julian, protective and fiercely loyal, tried to shield her. He beefed up her security, handled the press, and surrounded her with a wall of his wealth and influence. But in doing so, he inadvertently widened the chasm between their worlds. She felt less like his partner and more like a precious object he needed to keep safe. The real test came a few months later. Ilara's grandmother, whose health had been stable, took a sudden turn for the worse. A series of small strokes left her weak and in need of round-the-clock care. Julian, without hesitation, arranged for her to be moved to the best private care facility in the state, with a team of top specialists. Ilara was grateful, but also deeply unsettled. She would visit her grandmother in the sterile, luxurious facility and feel a profound sense of dislocation. This world of private nurses and cutting-edge treatments was Julian's world, purchased with his money. Her own role felt diminished, as if she were no longer her grandmother's caregiver, but merely a visitor in a life he was bankrolling. One evening, after a difficult visit, she came back to Julian's penthouse, a place she had started to call home, feeling adrift. He was on a conference call in his study, his voice sharp and commanding as he negotiated a multi-billion-dollar merger. She stood in the doorway, watching him, and the distance between them felt like a physical ocean. He was a king in his castle, and she was a foreigner who had overstayed her visa. When he finished his call, he saw her standing there, her expression troubled. "What is it?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "This isn't working, Julian," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. He went still. "What isn't working? The care facility. I can move her, find better doctors." "No, not that. The facility is incredible. You're incredible." She wrung her hands, struggling to articulate the turmoil inside her. "This. Us. Me. I'm losing myself. I look in the mirror, and I don't recognize the woman in the designer clothes you bought me. I spend my days approving foundation grants, and my evenings at dinners with people whose names I can't remember. And my grandmother? I used to be the one who took care of her. I made her soup, I read to her, I held her hand. Now, I schedule my visits around your social calendar, and a nurse tells me how she's doing. I'm becoming an accessory to your life, and I don't know how to be that." The hurt in his eyes was palpable. "Is that what you think you are? An accessory?" "It's what I feel like," she cried, tears of frustration welling. "You fight my battles, you pay my family's bills, you've given me this entire life. But you haven't left any room for me in it. The real me. The waitress who knew how to stretch a dollar and make her grandmother laugh. I'm so grateful for everything, Julian, but I'm suffocating." He was silent for a long time, his jaw tight. He walked to the window, staring out at the glittering city lights that seemed to mock her own feelings of powerlessness. "When my mother left," he said finally, his voice rough, "I made a promise to myself. That I would become so powerful, so self-sufficient, that I would never need anyone again. That I would be the one to protect, to provide, to control everything, so no one could ever hurt me or the people I care about." He turned to face her, his expression raw and vulnerable. "It's the only way I know how to love, Ilara. By solving problems, by building walls, by controlling the outcome. I thought I was protecting you. I never realized I was trapping you." "I don't need a protector, Julian," she said softly, walking toward him. "I need a partner. I fell in love with you in that diner and in your office, when we were a team. We were equals, fighting the same fight. I want that back." He reached for her, pulling her into his arms. "How?" he asked, his voice a broken whisper against her hair. "Tell me what to do. I'll do anything." "Let me take care of my grandmother," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "Not in that fancy facility. Let's bring her here, to the penthouse. There's more than enough room. I'll hire the nurses. I'll manage her care. I need to do this. For her, and for me." She pulled back to look him in the eye. "And the scholarship. I want to start. I want to go back to Columbia. I need to finish what I started, to have something that is truly mine." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a profound sense of respect. He was finally seeing her not as a damsel to be rescued, but as the strong, capable woman who had saved his life with a pot of hot coffee and a keen eye. "Okay," he said, his voice firm. "Okay. We'll do it your way." The next few months were a period of rebuilding, not just for Elara, but for them. They moved her grandmother into a sunny suite of rooms in the penthouse, and the sterile silence of the apartment was soon filled with the sounds of life, the quiet chatter of nurses, the scent of Elara's homemade soup, the sound of her reading aloud from old art books. Elara re-enrolled at Columbia, juggling her classes with her work at the Croft Foundation and her grandmother's care. It was exhausting, chaotic, and utterly wonderful. She felt like herself again. Julian, for his part, learned to step back. He learned that love wasn't about control, but about trust. He found joy not in solving her problems, but in watching her solve them herself, being the quiet, supportive presence in the background, cheering her on. One crisp spring afternoon, nearly a year after the gala, Elara was rushing home from a late class. She burst into the penthouse, dropping her heavy textbooks on the hall table, and found Julian waiting for her. He wasn't in a suit. He was dressed in jeans and a simple sweater. The apartment was quiet. Her grandmother was resting, the nurse sitting with her. "There's something I need to show you," he said, his expression unreadable. He led her not to the study or the living room, but to a room she rarely entered, a small, empty space he had once used for storage. It had been transformed. One wall was now a massive corkboard, just like the one she'd had in her office, but this one was covered in their own story, a photo of the North Star diner, the business card he'd given her, newspaper clippings from the gala, a picture of her grandmother smiling in the sunroom. In the center of the room, on an easel, was a painting. It was a Vermeer, or rather, a perfect, breathtaking copy of Woman with a Pearl Necklace. "It's a forgery," she breathed, walking closer, recognizing the masterful brushwork. "But it's the best I've ever seen." "The artist is very talented," Julian said, coming to stand behind her. "She's been a little busy to paint lately, but I have it on good authority. She's about to have more time on her hands." Elara turned, confused. "What are you talking about?" He smiled, that slow, genuine smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "I'm selling the company." She stared at him, speechless. "You're what?" "The merger is complete. I'm stepping down as CEO. I've accomplished everything my father and I set out to do. Now, I want to build something else." He took her hands in his. "The Croft Foundation is expanding. We're opening a new wing dedicated to the arts, funding scholarships, restoring lost works, and providing grants to struggling artists. And it needs a director. Someone with an eye for truth and beauty. Someone who knows the difference between what's priceless and what's worthless." Tears streamed down Elara's face. "Julian, I don't want to be your boss anymore, Elara, or your benefactor, or your protector." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. He knelt down on one knee, right there in the room he had filled with their memories. "I just want to be your partner. In everything." He opened the box. Inside was not a massive, flashy diamond, but a simple, elegant ring with a single, star-cut sapphire. "Elara Vance," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You came into my life in a run-down diner and showed me what loyalty really means. You taught me how to trust again. You are the truest thing I have ever known. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, laughing through her tears. "Of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He stood and pulled her into a kiss that was not about passion or desperation, but about peace. It was the feeling of two disparate pieces finally fitting together to create a single, beautiful composition. A masterpiece, not of art, but of love. Forged in chaos, tested by fire, and proven finally to be the real thing.